All right, nice to see you again, Elena.
Hello,
Makes me
Russell.
smile every time I see you, but I can't smile as big as you.
Oh, Russell, that's so sweet of you to say. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to see you. Everybody say hello to Russell, Texas Bentley, the Texas Donbass, the legendary Russell, who lives under the Ukrainian shelling for the last almost 9 years since 2014 in the area of Donbass, which used to be Eastern Ukraine, and now, upon referendum of 2022, joined Russia's federation. Correct, Russell?
That's right.
Russell, how has been the last 2 weeks? And we have met and did some other interviews. What changed? What's on the ground over there in Donbass?
Things are very heavy, very hard here right now. The shelling is again increasing. This last weekend, my wife and I were in the center of the city. We came under shelling from Grad rockets. They hit very close, less than 100 meters away from where we were sitting in a cafe. That's within like the lethal range. It was very fortunate that we were, lucky enough to get away without being hurt or killed. In that attack, they sent 40 rockets to the center of the city just randomly.
Wow.
And one person was killed, 11 people were injured. The weekend before that, we were in Petrovsky district. They made a HIMARS attack. A civilian house was hit. The mom was killed. The daughter was buried in the rubble of the house, totally blew up the house. It was very close to our house. In fact, our neighbor called us and told us that our neighborhood had been hit. My wife and I went out there. We got right to the house right when the second volley of artillery and rocket fire was coming in. It was very dangerous. We had roof and window damage on our own house. And again, within 100 meters or less, rockets were hitting. Our artillery shells were hitting. Yesterday, there was another big attack in Petrovsky district. I went out there today and made a video. A huge hole in the ground from 4 HIMARS rockets that hit in a civilian area. It was, again, a mom got killed, mother of 4 children. The ambulance shows up, 3 doctors and a driver. Again, they send in a second volley of rockets, and they killed everybody in the ambulance. 10 firemen that had come to put out the blaze of the house were also injured by the concussion. And it was really a terrible and tragic thing to see, So, and again, this is, the HIMARS rockets are extremely accurate. That's a very highly technical weapon, and I don't believe that the Ukrainian army has soldiers that are competently trained. I mean, the HIMARS rockets, they cost, a couple of $100,000 each. So they don't just let any idiot, pull the trigger on them. So I'm pretty sure that it's either NATO or American soldiers that are aiming and firing these HIMARS rockets. The Grad rockets, on the other hand, are not. I mean, they're kind of an aerial weapon. A truck of Grads, it's 40 rockets. They have like a 15-kilometer range, and they don't. You can't really tell where they're going to land. I mean, you can tell in a certain area, like maybe 3 or 4 football field area, they're going to hit somewhere in there, but you can't pinpoint accuracy. So the Grads they use, those are just basically random terrorist attacks. The HIMARS, those are weapons that are used, to a specific destination. And when it hits a civilian house, then, somebody just decided to blow up a civilian's house. and that's terrorism.
So, Russell, for any American who is watching it, because HIMARS is supplied by United States, by Pentagon, and by NATO, so every one of our taxpayer dollars now is basically used to hit civilians. There were no military targets there, correct, Russell? Those were civilian homes with no military base anywhere near. And with the precision HIMARS rocket hit, they decided that ambulance and doctors and nurses and women and elderly living and walking down the street is somehow a legitimate military target to kill nurses and doctors and civilians with HIMARS. And we do know that Americans are the ones who pick out the coordinates. And I'm sure even if they don't push the button, maybe they want to stay away from pushing the button, but they're the ones who are approving the targets. And they're the ones who tell Ukrainians where to shoot, how to shoot. We know that because they're bragging about it.
That's right.
So they're basically killing civilians in Donetsk area with American-made weapons, HIMARS, and I'm sure there's other ones like French Caesars I know used over there too. And you're, Russell, the witness that there were no military installations nearby, correct? Where these rockets.
That is correct. It's Petrovsky district. I mean, it's very close to the front. A lot of, soldiers and even, armored vehicles and stuff move through that area, but I mean on the main roads mainly, and not in like a neighborhood. I mean a lot of these roads are like dirt roads. I mean they're really too small for a tank or a BMP to even ride down. I mean, so, and it's the civilians that are getting hit in Donetsk. I mean the soldiers are on the front line, and that's what I mean. It's not that far from Petrovsky, but but there's definitely a difference between the front line in Mariinka or Alexandrovka and Petrovsky district, where people are going to the grocery store, kids are going to school. People are going to church on the weekends, on Sunday. It's just genuine terrorism, man. And people.
Yeah, to
Americans need to know, like when we're talking about their tax dollars and stuff, the U.S. military budget now is almost $800 billion a year.
Plus, yeah.
And so they have given, in the last year, they have given Ukraine over $100 billion worth of military equipment and support. And the people in America need to also understand that the entire national military budget of Russia is like 70 billion.
Yep.
And so the United States has given Ukraine 150% of the entire Russian military budget in the last year. And I mean, even and that's a huge. I mean, that's over $100 billion. And when you see all the things, I mean, maybe if the United States had been spending money on fixing their railroads, those people in East Palestine, Ohio, wouldn't have to be thinking about moving or getting cancer if they stay there because of the chemical spill from the train derailment. I mean, there's so much things that need to be fixed in the United States. And yet some idiot, is sending $100 billion, to a Nazi regime that doesn't help the United States in any way, that only makes things for the U.S. and for the whole world worse. Because, the more that they continue to escalate and provoke Russia and to continue this war that the United States started 9 years ago, the war didn't start a year ago. It started 9 years ago with the Maidan. And the more they continue to escalate and provoke this war, it brings us every bit closer to Armageddon, to nuclear exchanges and the end of humanity. And it's a very deadly, serious threat. And, and the people who own and control the U.S. government and the U.S. military are sending $100 billion to make things worse.
Yes, true. And there is a new package, I think, another $2 billion. It's like another week, another several $billion. And we have this terrible fires and derailments throughout the United States. Ohio, the Palestine, East Palestine, I think that's the cities. That was just one of them. There was another explosion in Florida. There was like several of them in Nebraska. Infrastructure is crumbling, things are falling apart. And what does our American president, quote unquote, Biden do? He goes to Ukraine. And what? It's like, really? We have a country that's falling apart. And the best thing you can do is take 500 million of American taxpayer dollars and give it to a foreign country. While Ohio doesn't get any help from FEMA. They said, too bad, tough luck, Ohio, no support for you, no money for you, but for Ukraine. It's insanity. These people are robbing us blind in the daylight. And Americans seem to be asleep. That's why we're doing a program like this, right, Russell? To let them know, people, the war started in 2014. America has been shelling money at Ukraine for all these 9 years. Only now they're doing more of it. And our homeless are still sleeping on the streets, and our veterans are still homeless, just like they were 9 years ago. Who got richer? Ukrainian oligarchs, American oligarchs, the Bidens, the Zelenskys and company. And that's it. And Ukrainian people do not have any benefit from it. I talked to a Ukrainian volunteer, I think a week ago and I asked him, I said, the guy says, you cannot criticize Zelensky. They're stealing the monies that come from United States. All the corruption leaders built themselves corrupt empires there in Ukraine. And he is a Ukrainian patriot, tells me that America is killing Ukraine. Ukrainian tells me, he says, you had this guy come to your Congress, Pritula, I think his name. He done nothing for the army. I am a volunteer, he said. His name is Alexei Oskar. I talked to the guys from the front line. The commanders are stealing their paycheck. They write themselves bonuses while stealing Ukrainian soldiers' paychecks. They're fudging the numbers. When the guy is actually killed, they're saying he's missing in action in order not to pay his family the money. He said, you, America, are killing us by providing all this money because our corrupt politicians are basically just enriching themselves, and we're the ones that are suffering because they are oppressing us even more. The more money they get, the more they oppress us. And he's a volunteer, and they're trying to put him in jail, put him under house arrest for speaking out the truth of what is happening in Ukrainian corruption, army / commanders / the humanitarian aid that gets stolen and ends up on the shelves of the stores, of the Ukrainian officials who own those supermarkets, who are Zelensky's friends. So it's insane. We're basically destroying Ukraine with weapons and with money, because both are doing basically harm. That's what that Ukrainian guy said to me. So
that's a fact. I would agree with what he said completely. And I wish him good luck. I would not want to be an honest man in Ukraine these days.
Exactly. And that's why it's like he has several videos I watched, and that's why I said, I have to call this guy. I mean, he's really trying to at least speak the truth. With our taxpayer money is going to Ukraine, and here's the honest guy, tries to tell everybody that money is not getting to the people. And what the Zelensky regime does, wants to put him in jail and puts him under house arrest. And he cannot go to the front line and talk to the guys who call them and tell them what the commanders are doing to them, using them as a battlefield meat and all that. So yeah, things are Since we're not helping the situation in Ukraine, put it this way, neither with weapons, no money.
I mean,
Tell me, Russell, go ahead.
you can say that about, certainly in the 21st century, that, every country that the US or NATO has gone in to protect or to liberate or whatever they call it, not one country has gotten better, and every single country has gotten horribly worse. I mean, you think of Iraq, you think of Afghanistan, think of Libya, think of Yugoslavia, which was 1999, but almost on the edge.
Well, think of Ukraine right now.
Yeah, and Ukraine, the same thing.
Left in this destruction. I used to live in Ukraine. In case somebody doesn't know, I speak both Russian and Ukrainian. I lived in Ukraine and I lived in Russia. But guys, I do not recognize Ukraine. This looks to me like Aleppo, Syria. That's what it looks like.
Sure. I mean, that's the way I feel about the United States, looking at videos from there now after being gone for 8 years. I mean, it's like, what happened to the country that I grew up in? How did things get so crazy that, there's whole neighborhoods of people living in tents or, plastic bags or something on the sidewalk,
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, I was born in 1960. I remember when my grandfather could work a 40-hour-a-week job selling life insurance, and his wife didn't have to work. His children, went to college. They paid off their house. They had 2 cars. They had a swimming pool in the backyard. They had a little farm from one guy working 40 hours a week. And I mean, and he wasn't like a big shot. He wasn't a CEO or anything. And that's, that was like, the golden age of America, after the Second World War, when all the American soldiers came back, the oligarchs that even owned the government back then, they understood that if they kept exploiting the working class the way they had during the Depression before the war, that, all these hundreds of thousands of American combat veterans, we're going to go get their guns again and turn them against their real enemies, which were these oligarchs. And so they had to give, plus they also had the, the alternative system of the Soviet Union then, so they had to give, Social Security, they had to give Medicare, they had to give the GI Bill, where all the veterans that came back from the war went to college for free. And these days in the United States, the number one reason for people going bankrupt is medical bills.
Medical, yep.
And then, you look at the student debt, it's like over $1 trillion. And that's insane. Education, a civilized country educates its people and doesn't put them into debt slavery for getting education. And especially when you consider the so-called quality of American education these days, where you can get, a degree in gender studies or some, worthless garbage, it's like, the history of, gay left-handed cats in movies or something like that, and you get a PhD in that.
And by the way, I've heard your interview before. You are not against gay people. You're just making the side notes of what you think about our education system.
That's right. That's right. In the 1990s, I helped to bring free medicine for gay men that were dying of AIDS, and so I got to know a lot of them. I didn't like most of them, but I still helped them because they were dying. And, there, but for the grace of God could be anybody. So, I helped them out, and I'm not against gay people in the least bit, but but I'm certainly against, what do you call it, drag queens going to elementary schools. I mean, that's insane. You know, I mean, I'm against, you know, teachers telling an elementary school kid that if they want to be a girl, they can go, you know, get surgery to change their gender or something like that. That's just insane. You know, I mean, you know, it's like what people do, what their own personal preferences are for sex or love, that's their business. But it's a private deal. It's not something to walk down the street. You know what I mean? It's like I saw is in France. In France this last week, they changed the law for bestiality.
Yes, I've read that. At least I thought it was proposed. Did they already do that? Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, as I understood it, it has been done. It's been signed. But you know, and it's like, oh, you know, you can do whatever you want with your animal as long as they don't, you know, don't have to go like to the vet, like the animal hospital. You know what I mean? It's like, and of course, it makes you feel sorry for the animals. But
what happened
what
to
is that
animal
doing to
abuse?
society?
What happened to animal abuse? Where is PETA? Where is Save the Whales people? I mean, where is everybody? I've seen they had the same protest in Germany too, in favor of this type of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, Europe, you're really going down the tubes fast. If you have nothing sacred left, you know, the children, now the parents have no say-so in America. The child, a 3-year-old, can decide what gender the child is, and the parent has no right to have an opinion, not even to forbid any changes, irreversible changes to child's biology. A parent has no right to even think or speak about the matter. And if you think about, you know, I'm in real estate, you have to be 18 to sign a contract, because obviously people do consider there is a certain age at which you're capable of make life altering decisions like buying a house, right? So to buy a house, you need to be 18. But to change your complete entire biology irreversibly most of the time, you don't have to be 18. You don't have to have a certain life experience behind your belt before you're equipped to make these life-altering decisions. But to buy a house, you have to be 18. But to do physical changes to your entire body and your entire soul and into your entire mind, because obviously this is all connected, you don't have to be 18. You can be 3. Something is very wrong with this picture. So, okay,
It's
Russell,
crazy.
let's go back to our Ukraine war, because
okay, let's go.
Looks like without us, they cannot solve the Ukraine war. Tell me, Russell, what was the Putin speech like on the 21st? Did you guys expect more, or did he, you know, knock all the points? What was the significance of Vladimir Putin, the Russian president's speech on the February 21st?
Well, everybody here loves and respects Vladimir Putin. He is, I mean, it would be difficult to argue that there's a greater statesman in the world today than him. And as for his speech, you know, as a statesman, as a, you know, 3-dimensional chess player, you know, he's always going to do the unexpected. And, you know, and everybody's like, oh, he's going to declare war against Ukraine. Oh, he's going to declare war against NATO. And then he's like, and he just gives this really nice, peaceful speech. And he's like, hey, we're just going to make everything better. We're going to improve the economy. We're going to take care of, build more schools and la, la, la. But, you know, what's important to note is the same day, while Putin was giving his speech, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the U.S. ambassador to their headquarters and said, look, you know, we demand that you give an explanation about what happened to the Nord Stream pipeline, and we very strongly warn you that if you continue to provide weapons and money and mercenaries to Ukraine, that is going to escalate the situation, and that we are going to consider, whoever's escalating the situation to be an enemy and a legitimate target. So, I mean, and it's completely judo, it's like, the magician magic trick, he's like, hey, look over here. And while everybody's looking over there, he's like, bam, over here, and so, it was pretty cool because, the important point got made to the United States that, Russia is still not kidding. I mean, we're holding our own on the battlefield right now. There's a lot of people, including myself, who wish that, we were a lot further ahead than we are. But, this is a hard war. I mean, Russia is not fighting Ukraine. They're fighting all of NATO. And there are 20,000 Polish troops fighting in Ukraine right now. There's tens of thousands more of other NATO countries, British, Canadian, French, German. There's whole brigades worth of foreign soldiers here. And the weapons to back them up, 150% of the Russian military budget worth of weapons are already here. I mean, not all of them make it to the front. A lot of them get stolen and sold. But at the same point, Russia is fighting a very hard war. And, and it's difficult, I mean, so we're holding our own, the Ukrainians are not going to take Donbass. They're not going to take Crimea. They're not going to invade Russia. That's impossible. So, the war continues, and it's not just, like I said, it's not a war of Russia against Ukraine. It's a war of NATO against Russia, and it's literally a global war, and it's not just military here. It's economic, it's political, it's information, it's even like cultural war too, in many ways. And so Russia's holding its own. Russia cannot be defeated. And we'll make our move when it's time. And when we do, it's going to be when it's least expected, when, everybody in NATO is looking the other way, and they're not going to see the freight train that's coming up from behind them. And, so the best thing for everybody in this world is that this war get over with as soon as possible. And as far as most of the people here on the ground, and especially those doing the fighting, as far as we're concerned, the best thing is that it get over with as quickly as possible. It's like, if you have an infected tooth, you have to pull it.
Don't say it, Russell, infected tooth. I'm starting to get some toothache here.
Well, I mean, you understand, it's one of those things that, once it gets bad, the only thing you can do is pull it out. You can't.
Fingers crossed. I'm holding my fingers crossed.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, the longer you wait, the more infected it gets, the more dangerous it gets, the more painful it gets. So just do it.
Russell, tell us about Transnistria. There is a big deal of what's going on there, because like you said just now, the longer Russia waits, the more NATO will come up with different scenarios to pull in somebody else into this. They've obviously figured, oh, Moldova is not bad. They have changed one of their, top government official. There was a lady before. Now this guy, gosh, I forget, something Darin or Dorin or something Racine, or in other words, a new guy. And he obviously as soon as he got in, said that maybe it's time to end Moldova's neutrality, meaning let's pull Moldova into NATO. And then let's solve Transnistria question. And Transnistria is the area that borders Moldova. It's between Moldova and Ukraine, correct, Russell?
That's right.
And this area has Russian peacekeepers. And I keep reading on many Telegram channels, on the news, including on your Telegram channel. Shout out to Russell Bentley on Telegram. Everybody look Russell up and subscribe to his channel on Telegram. But everybody is concerned because Zelensky, a couple of days ago, tried to insinuate as if Russia is preparing a coup in Moldova. So we need to preempt Russia and send some Ukrainian troops in Moldova. And Russia, of course, denied trying to interfere into any affairs of Moldova. But it almost seems like Moldova and Zelensky and NATO are trying to create some type of movements there, so they could either push or surround or remove Russian peacekeepers out of that Transnistria, because that's close to Odessa. And
That's
they would
right.
be here that Russian troops can help. The peacekeepers might help if Russia decides to take Odessa later down the road. What are your thoughts about this Transnistria, Russell?
Okay.
What's going on?
The thing about Transnistria is it's a majority Russian area. It's been, autonomous from Moldova for decades now. And there have been Russian peacekeepers there, and the Russian peacekeepers are not militarily significant. It's like 3 battalions. So we're talking about 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers at the max, and the thing is, the reason they're there, and this is like the wild card joker in the deck, is there is the biggest ammo dump in Europe is there. It was where a lot of the ammunition, when the Soviet Union dissolved, when it dissolved, they put 40,000 tons of ammunition there in this big ammo dump. And then Russia took about half of it out, but there's still 20,000 tons. And when you think about, how much, a ton is, and then you think about how much 1,000 tons is, and then you multiply that by 20, that's a lot of destructive power. I mean, it's weapons, it's hand grenades, it's rifle bullets, it's, rockets, it's all kinds of weaponry there. Now, they say that about half of it is, past its storage date and is not really, it would be dangerous to try and use it. But that's still 10,000 tons. I mean, and when you think about, just 1,000 tons of ammunition, you can, that's enough to go on the offensive with, And so right now, Russia, I mean, there's been, some conflict in the Russian military in the last week about some of the units on the front, some of the best units on the front, including Donbass troops, including Wagner, that have had to publicly criticize the Russian General Command because they're saying, hey, we're trying to take this city and we can't move forward because we don't have enough ammunition. And in fact, we're getting shorted so much that it's difficult and dangerous for us to even defend ourselves. And that was a big conflict last week. Now it seems to have been resolved, thank God. But when there's a name for it, and it's they call it ammunition hunger. When a military unit doesn't have enough ammunition to do their job. And so when the Russian military units that are on the front fighting right now are using that phrase, ammunition hunger. And yet right there in Transnistria, there's, at least 10,000 tons of usable ammunition. It makes you wonder why they didn't take care of that a long time ago. But the thing is, that ammo dump is 2 kilometers from the Ukrainian border.
Yep.
And if there's 2,000 Russian soldiers guarding it, then 6,000 Ukrainian soldiers can come in and be absolutely certain of taking it over. And then the Ukrainians have 10,000 tons of ammunition to use. And it's conveniently located, close to Odessa, not that far from Kherson, Kharkov, and
Kherson,
so
yeah.
yeah, Kherson, and it's like it's a very serious situation. I mean, the Russian Ministry of Defense has already noted and announced that they are seeing a military buildup along the border there, and that they have information that the Ukrainians are going to create some kind of false flag provocation where some Ukrainian soldiers dressed as in uniforms of Russians will, take a couple of shots at Ukraine, and then Ukraine's going to say, okay, they attacked us, we have to go in. Just like how Hitler started the Second World War by putting German prisoners in Polish army uniforms and shooting them next to a German military base on the border there, so it's a very serious, deadly situation. Again, it's another, unfortunately, if not unexpected, at least unprepared for by the Russian general staff, new complication in the mix that can change very seriously the whole, drama of the war very quickly. And, and it just goes to prove the absolute irrefutable fact that the longer this war goes on, the more dangerous it's going to be for the people of the liberated area of Ukraine, for Russia itself, and for the world. So the best thing to do is to end this war decisively and quickly.
Russell, if you think about it, remember 1856, I believe, Crimea War, when there was the Russian Tsar, and I think, who was it? Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, and then there was France, Sardinia, and I think Britain, right?
Yeah, Brits, sure, of course. The charge of the Light Brigade, I think.
Yes, and they were fighting the Russian Tsar. And then there was this entire thing of Austria threatening, I think, to join on the side of Turkish Ottoman Empire. And then the Tsar signed this humiliating peace treaty, basically giving back the Bessarabia, which is, again, this Moldova type area and Romania part area. I'm thinking, this looks like a repeat of history. We're back to the war in the same region, and Moldova is going to the forefront now. And it sounds like Zelensky wants to send troops down there, or at least asks Moldova to ask him, because they say there is a Ukrainian troops supposedly accumulating. And I think Russian Ministry of Defense said that they see that there is motion there. That, I don't know.
Exactly right. Officially, they have said it.
So my question is, do you think Zelensky is trying to flare up Moldova so they could push Russian peacekeepers and then try to go onto Crimea? Because, they would be concerned to leave some peacekeepers, Russians there in Transnistria, in case they would help them or whatnot. I mean, does that signal like Zelensky is really trying to go for Crimea by flaring up this Moldova, Transnistria?
Well, it's certainly...
for the weapons, what do you think? He's just going for the weapons, or
well, if he gets the weapons, then he's much more in a much better position to make an attack on Crimea, because he's just got 10,000 tons of ammunition. I mean, it's, it's, a day's drive by Kamaz truck, filled up with each truck with 5 tons of weapons, of ammunition. And it can cause a real problem. And I mean, when you speak about the repeat of history, it's interesting because, 100 years ago, it was the Russian Civil War. I mean, between the Red Army and the White Army. And a lot of people in the West, they don't know that during the Civil War, there was 100,000 foreign troops that came here, including British, including Americans, including French, that were fighting right here, in Crimea, in the Donbass, and I mean, and all over Russia and the Far East too, but, the same countries that invaded Russia in the Civil War 100 years ago are the same ones that are lining up again and already have invaded, because you know what? I mean, I don't know how many Japanese there are, but there are definitely thousands of Americans, thousands of British, thousands of French,
Polish soldiers out there, and yeah, they're from all over, even from other former Soviet republics too. Azerbaijanians, some Armenians, I've seen Georgians, people from all over the world, fighting on the side of Ukraine as mercenaries or volunteers.
Including ISIS, which is very important that people understand, because, I mean, and I was telling people about it from 2015, I mean, it was a known fact back then, or at least early 2016. Sheikh Mansour Battalion, whatever that was, those are ISIS cannibals. They came from Syria, they came from Iraq. These are, the worst terrorists in the world. And the thing is, these jihadi cannibals were paid, trained, armed, and directed by the same people that created the Ukrainian Nazis, which is the CIA, American, NATO secret services and military. And so, of course, they do the same, kind of dirty tricks, the same kind of terrorist attacks. And I mean, and the escalations continue. I mean, there was some horrific videos released recently about the Ukrainians creating and using chemical weapons. I mean, that's a documented fact now. I mean, everyone that is well informed knows now that the United States was working on biological weapons in multiple laboratories in Ukraine before the special operations started. Those labs have now been moved mainly to Georgia and supposedly also to Moldova. So I mean, what else is there? I mean, were they going to start throwing nuclear bombs around? Which, in fact, the Russians did find a couple of low yield, high radioactivity dirty bombs when they first came in. When they took Chernobyl, when they took the Gostomel airport, and when they took the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, they found dirty bombs. They found, at least in some of those places, dirty bombs, and in others, in Zaporozhye, it was more like the evidence that they were trying to create one there as well. But in Chernobyl and in Gostomel, there's very strong evidence that they actually found them and they took them out,
Doesn't surprise me. Russian Ministry of Defense, for those who are watching is thinking, oh no, this is just Russian propaganda. No, people, look it up. About a month and a half ago, Russian Ministry of Defense, Chief Mr. Shoigu called his American counterpart here, talking about that they have a credible evidence that Ukraine's working on potentially releasing some type of a dirty bomb there. And those two people, they don't talk to each other. So if Russian Ministry of Defense chief actually had to call American here, his counterpart, what is it, Lloyd Austin or one of the other guys
exactly.
here, and actually tell him, it's like, hey guys, your people in Ukraine there, your Zelensky is playing with dirty bomb. You better take care of him or we will. Like a friendly reminder, you know, because we don't want this to escalate into nuclear exchange. So take care of your puppet over there a little bit better. Have an eye on him. Russell, so situation in Transnistria, do you think they're trying to sort of create this commotion there in order to bring Romania's NATO troops through that and push Russian peacekeepers and say, and get Romania NATO troops involved because Ukraine cannot gather any more viable army? They're catching people on the streets. They are now sending draft notices to legally blind people in Ukraine. They have no, they have no people. Do you think they're trying to push this Transnistria situation to try to bring Romania's troops or maybe even Polish somehow? And then try to go for Crimea? You think that's their plan, game plan?
Well, I mean, the good thing about the Crimean Peninsula is there's a very small choke point where they can come in by land. I've been there, Jonkoy. I've seen like the front line, and it's, I mean, the thing is that's such a small concentrated area that there's really no way that the Ukrainian army can come through on a land corridor and make, any kind of successful move against Crimea. And there's no way that the Russians are going to let them. I would think that, the Russian nuclear policy now is that if it's a threat to the existence of Russia, they will use nukes if they think they need to. And I think that if a serious military offensive against Crimea would fit in that category. And I mean, they can drop a couple of low yield nukes on Ukrainian forces and end the offensive instantly. So I mean, the idea of them, and there's a lot of talk with the NATO countries and even the United States that they don't want NATO to try. They don't want Ukraine to try and do anything, serious against Crimea.
Yeah. Russell, I've heard some of the Ukrainian personalities put it this way. One of them, Alexei Arestovich, that's a guy who resigned from being Zelensky's advisor because he actually said the truth on one of his streams that there was Ukrainian air defense missile rocket that fell on civilian and exploded and killed civilians. So he was basically talking to another Ukrainian personality, something Dmitry Gordon, and they were already talking, commenting on Mr. Putin's speech that, NATO already made the decision. They're already going for it. They're going for it, meaning they basically are going to destroy Russia and we're going to take Crimea and this and that. And look at China. China is not going to say anything. And I'm thinking to myself, Chinese, I think either Chinese president, the chairman was supposed to speak. I think one of their foreign counselors or foreign ministries were visiting Moscow, and they keep talking about peace plan. And China now supposedly today is going to come out and deliver a peace plan. They released some points of the peace plan.
They did. It was a 12-point plan. Yes, I saw that.
There is a grain deal there again. And I'm thinking, so now we know who is behind this grain deal, which all Russian people get their skin curled when they hear grain deal because they feel that it has no benefit to Russia whatsoever. But sounds like China likes a grain deal. Of course, Turkey likes a grain deal. And then China talks about ceasefire, and China talks about, the ceasefire, grain deal, the peace proposals, and I'm thinking, does it start looking like Russia really is not fighting this war, but it's actually China behind Russia, and Russia is kind of constrained of what it can do or cannot do, because then China may not like it. And then we see Ukraine, and behind Ukraine is United States. And I'm thinking, all of a sudden, China comes with this peace proposal. I'm thinking, what does China have to do with anything? So these two Ukrainian personalities, Gordon and Arestovich, are saying, oh, China came out with a peace deal because China wants to be a mediator, because mediator gets the seat at the table, so the China could take some Russian territory when this whole war is over. That's the Ukrainian guys. That's how they see China's peace deal, meaning China is trying to get themselves positioned to where when Russia is defeated, then Russia is being divided between everybody. China gets a chunk of it. I mean, seriously, this is what they're discussing. And I'm thinking, does it look like the war is turning after China coming out with this peace proposal to be as if it's China fighting against United States, or United States against China? On the side of China, the hands are Russian hands, and on the China side of United States are Ukrainian hands. So basically starting to look like China and the United States are fighting each other by the hands of Ukrainians and Russians. Doesn't it? Because I thought, what do you think about China suddenly coming out proposing a peace deal? Wouldn't it be up to the parties who are actually doing the fighting to propose the peace deals? What do you think? What do you make out of this?
I think it's a very interesting and legitimate point. The idea that maybe China has been constraining Russia all along, and Russia, Russia plus China is an unbeatable, combination. Russia without China is basically Russia against the world. And the danger is that if China was to, break its friendship with Russia and join the West, then, Russia becomes David against Goliath, and that is a very scary scenario. And, I think that what you just said is very interesting from the point of view that it could explain a lot about why Russia has still had the velvet gloves on and moved so slowly and like that. And but of course, on the other hand, if that's the case, then China already is not really an ally if they're holding Russia back. And, the thing that's unfortunate is that, there have been a lot of, not just military mistakes, but diplomatic mistakes made in the Ukrainian war. Since 2014, one of them, Russia totally got chumped by the Minsk Accords, and now, all the people from the West that were negotiating diplomatically for years are now coming out and saying, yeah, we were just BSing them the whole time. We fooled them, while we were pretending to be trying to make a peace deal. All we were really doing was strengthening our army for the day when we got strong enough to attack them, so these kind of diplomatic mistakes are every bit as dangerous as military mistakes and can be just as costly. And so if China is holding back Russia from doing what needs to be done, then they're not really an ally. And of course, hopefully the Chinese are smart enough to understand that if they betray Russia because of course, just as NATO and the West promised the Soviet Union that if they allowed the reunification of Germany, that NATO would not move eastward. They looked him straight in the eye and said, "We will not move 1 inch eastward." And now they're on the Russian border. So, I mean, if China thinks, it's like a deal with the devil. The devil always lies and he always cheats. And if you think that you're going to make a deal with the devil and get a good deal out of it, you're wrong every time. And if China thinks that they can make a deal with the West and carve up Russia and they're going to get a part of Russia, because the thing is, as much as Russia needs China as an ally, which it does, it really does, but as much as Russia needs China, China needs Russia too, because without Russia, then it's China against the world. And they will come in there and they will, China's like the main economy in the world right now. Because the American economy is really not based on anything but lies. China has production capabilities. China has actual resources. And so it's a scary situation, but it's very interesting, that concept, which I have to admit had not occurred to me before. It's really interesting, and I hate to hear it from the likes of Arestovich, but that's something that I'll probably be thinking about and looking into in the next few days, But I just want to say that, as vulnerable as Russia would be if it was betrayed by China, China would be equally as vulnerable if it betrays China.
The problem is, I think United States and China, I think, are tied so tightly together. I think, what do we have? I don't want to quote, but 70% of imports from China or something like that. So if Biden decides to sanction China, then China is really in trouble. So does he use his leverage and threatening China's sanctions to have China now pressure Russia into be a good girls or good boys, whatnot? Over there, it's like, yeah. And then if you think about Hunter Biden dealings with China, when he got billions or 2 billion or 1 billion, who cares, right? From the Chinese government, joined ventures and all that. It's like, if China is holding Russia back, if Russia constantly has to look back, what will China say? Should I, attack this, missile? Should I send this rocket? Oh, China may not like it, and I don't want to lose my ally. Then Russia's hands are really tight, and then that makes China come out of the shadows, basically, as the player in this whole chessboard. And the player that actually allows or disallows for certain decisions in Russia. And that's a bit of a scary situation, because then Russia cannot act independently. It has to look back over the shoulder to see if the allies are going to approve it, if India or China is going to say, oh, good job, or oh, no, don't do this, and of course, China does not. Arestovich also mentioned that, oh, of course, China doesn't like it that Russia joined the Lugansk and Donetsk, because China does not like all this separatist movement like Taiwan. So Ukrainians are, in their analysis, are really relying on China being sort of like a gray cardinal who in the end will play their hand versus Russia's hand. Because, I like to listen to both sides to see who is betting on, right? You can never know too much. But that's one of the, so I just wanted to get your opinion on what the China is really doing with this peace proposal all of a sudden. Like, shouldn't it be Russia and Ukraine?
And I will say this, I read the proposal, and there are, and I mean, and I just kind of like, I mean, I read each of the 12 points, but I didn't go into anything like really in depth yet. But my first reaction is basically that there are several points in that peace proposal that it seems to me that the United States will never agree to. I mean, particularly the removal of all NATO soldiers and weapons and stuff from Ukraine. The security guarantees for Russia. I mean, I had the feeling, just as a first impression, that what China proposed was just kind of a red herring. It was something to look at, but that everybody knew was never going to happen. And I could be wrong, of course, but that was my impression, because some of the things of those proposals were things that I really believe that the United States will in no case ever agree to.
And I think Russian Zakharova, I think foreign minister or the spokesman for the foreign ministry of Russia, she said that supposedly China did not discuss with Russia this plan, other than just let them know that there is this plan. In other words, Russia sort of stepped back, saying that it's China, and that's what China wanted to put in writing. In other words, we didn't tell China like what to write. But yeah, you're right. It's interesting. We'll see where it goes. The scary part is China has been around for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, America only for a few hundred, right?
That's right.
And Russia for a couple of thousand plus minus years. So China could outsmart everyone in this little scenario. That. But what I am thinking, Russell, I hear lots of guys and the militias and the fighters. What do you think, if for some reason this would come to pass, they would agree to ceasefire again? Because ceasefire was Minsk. That was supposed to be ceasefire. And you and I talked, the only one who ceased fire was the Russian side or the Donetsk militia side. And
That's
the Russian
right.
side. And Ukrainians never stopped. They fired all these 9 years and counting, despite the ceasefire agreements in place. So what would another ceasefire do? What do you think? I've heard some Russian militia guys saying, oh, now they are incorporated in the army, saying, no, we have to go all the way. Only military victory is going to take care of this. What do you think? Ceasefire agreement or military victory?
No ceasefire agreement, anything. I mean, the very minimum that, I mean, or let me put it like this: anything less than Russian liberation of Kiev down to the northern border of Moldova and everything east of that is a humiliating and strategic defeat for Russia that will only ensure its destruction. And I'm not talking about going to the Dnieper River, because that's a total red herring there too, because you can't have, the Dnieper, first of all, it's the main water resource for all of Ukraine, for Crimea, for southeastern Ukraine especially. You can't have, it's also a major transportation route. Shipping goes down the Dnieper, to the Black Sea. You can't have an enemy on the other side of that river, that can dump toxic poisons into the water, that can, bomb or shoot at ships that are going down the river. You can't have it. The Dnieper River cannot be the dividing line. It has to be east of Kiev. Anything, like the far western parts, Ivo-Frankovsk and Lvov, like that, the Polish can have that. The Hungarians can have their part. The Czechs, if they want some, go ahead. But, and there's no use in Russia going all the way there, because those people are hardcore Banderites. They've you know, I mean, you know, they're cannibals. You know, let them, and there's really nothing worth fighting for there anyway. You know, I mean, the Carpathian Mountains have already been clear cut. You know, there's no natural resources like there are in the east. So, you know, there's no need to go further than Kiev, but you must go. You must take Kiev, you know, and then you can say, okay, this is going to be part of Russia, as it has been for thousands of years. And everything to the east of this is the buffer zone, you know, between NATO and, you know, actual Russian Federation. And so anything less, I mean, if when people hear talk about, oh, we're going to negotiate just for the 4 oblasts, you know, that supposedly have gone to the Russian Federation. When we hear that, you know, what is it, Zaporozhye and Lugansk and Donetsk and Kherson, I mean, Kharkov, da? I mean, you can't, I mean, when we hear that, it inspires hatred against the people that say it, because we understand that if that's all it is, then we're still going to be bombed every day, just like we are now. We understand that it's a humiliation and a defeat and a disgrace, and, you know, and spitting on the graves of all the heroes that have, you know, because this war has been going on, you know, for 8 years. The people of Donbass have defended Russia. You know, I mean, certainly Russia stopped the big offensive that was planned for, you know, March of last year. But for 8 years before that, Donbass, the people of Donbass stopped the offensive that was planned against Russia. You know, this war has always been against Russia, and it was the people of Donbass that defended Russia for 8 years. And now for Russia to come in and make some greasy deal where they say, oh, we're just going to do this little teeny bit, you know, if you give us the rest of Donetsk Oblast, you know, we'll stop fighting. You know, I mean, the words that I want to say when I hear that kind of stuff, you can't put on YouTube, so I won't say them. But, you know, I mean, and, you know, this is from somebody that fought in the army for 1 year and has lived here for 8 years. And you imagine the feelings of the people who have lived here their whole lives, the soldiers, the heroes, the unbelievable heroes that have fought in the war for 8 years. When they hear like, oh yeah, we're just gonna, you know, we're just gonna give up and we'll just, you know, have the Ukrainians be 30 miles away or something, you know, still within HIMARS anytime they feel like shooting. No, that's not gonna work. And I mean, and the thing is that Russia needs to understand is it won't work for them either. Because, you know, the Nazis that own and control the governments and militaries of Europe and the United States and Canada, they're not going to stop. You know, I mean, if, you know, anyone that's stupid enough to make another agreement with the people who just chumped them for 8 years with the Minsk agreement, you know, doesn't deserve to be called a diplomat. They deserve to be called a fool, you know? And
I was
so
gonna say, go ahead.
anything less than Kiev under full, you know, Kiev and Chernobyl, down to the northern end of Moldova, and every single thing east of that under absolute Russian control. Anything less than that is a humiliating defeat that will guarantee the eventual destruction of Russia.
At some point, like you said, it's not good enough to come out and say, oh, we've trusted the West when they told us, I think Medvedev said that, that they will close the sky over Libya and it will be just peachy. But instead, oh, they killed Gaddafi, but we didn't know. They lied to us, meaning the West. Oh, but they did the Minsk agreement. Oh, but we've trusted them, but they didn't fulfill it. Oh, but we trusted when we negotiated with Turkey in 22, then if we withdraw the troops from Kiev, that we're going to have a peace deal. Oh, but we withdrew the troops, but no peace. Zelensky said, no, now we're not going to have peace. They lie to us all the time. Well, at some point, that's just not good enough. If they keep lying to you, if they keep, signing these deals that are good for nothing, and you keep following and falling for this stuff, then at some point you have to take responsibility for what are you doing? Where's your reconnaissance? I mean, where's your stuff?
Exactly.
These are all people's lives. These people are dying every day. The longer this goes, the slower the Russia does what it does, the more it drags on. Because today I read an article this morning, one of the American newspapers, I'm not sure, New York Times or Bloomberg, one of those guys who always write something, and they said, Russia's strategy changed in Ukraine. Russia no longer wants to take territory. Now it just wants to exhaust Ukraine. Okay. So now this is American press saying that Russia no longer, supposedly Russian strategy changed in Ukraine, and now Russia doesn't want to take territory. I was like, Russia never really wanted to take territory. Russia wanted you to fulfill Minsk agreements. Russia had to go in and start taking territory because you were not doing anything that you're supposed to do. But now they're trying to portray as if Russia is not really going to advance. That's what they're trying to portray to American audience, that Russia is just going to drain Ukraine of resources, military things, and all that. So I don't know. What do you think Russia's strategy is at this moment?
It's very difficult to say. It's difficult to understand because, I mean, I'm sure that you're aware of the conflict that happened this last week between Prigozhin and the general staff of the Russian army.
You mean the weapons, that they were calling for weapons, or was it something else?
Ammunition that they were supposed to be getting, and for some reason they're fighting, and of course, indisputably, Wagner is the most successful military unit in the Russian military, and they have suffered very heavy casualties. The estimates are that more than 40,000 soldiers have died fighting in the Wagner military company, but Prigozhin also said, that Wagner itself has killed 110,000 Ukraine soldiers, which is pretty impressive considering that it's much harder to assault than it is to defend.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden, there appeared things in the Russian military press and military orders and stuff saying, don't use the word Wagner. We call them Russian volunteers or la-di-da like that. When you're reporting, military successes by Wagner, don't say the word Wagner. And, then all of a sudden they start not getting the ammunition. They're supposed to, they had, and Prigozhin actually published, a list of the ammunition that he was supposed to be getting. It's like, this is how much they need every day. Every 10 days, they bring 10 days worth of ammunition. And then all of a sudden they show up and it's like, here's what you're supposed to have for 10 days. And in many of the categories, all of a sudden they're getting, 1/2 or 1/4 or 1/10 of what they're supposed to be getting. And this is while they're on the assault in Bakhmut, Artemovsk, and apparently he called up, the general staff or whatever, and said, hey, what the hell's going on? And he didn't get an answer. And so, I mean, he felt compelled to go public with it, you know. I mean, and a lot of people say, oh, you know, you don't want to, in the middle of a war, you don't want to argue. But at the same time, you know, if you're in the middle of a war and you're on the front line getting shot at, and your argument is with the guy back in Moscow who's, you know, sitting in the back of a limousine going to some fancy restaurant for lunch, and you're dying, your guys are dying because they don't have the ammo to defend themselves, then, I mean, then that's a serious situation. I mean, it begs the question, what's going on, you know, because, I mean, you know, the most successful unit that's doing the hardest fighting, where else are you gonna send the ammunition to besides that, you know? And so there's a lot of questions about what exactly is going on, what exactly the strategy is. I mean, you know, when, like I said, when we start hearing about negotiations here, you know, I mean, it's like, you know, it's like, you know, pouring hot lava into our ears. You know, we just don't want to hear nothing about that. You know, and it's like, you know, people today, I was talking to some people that were neighbors of the woman that got killed yesterday in the attack. And as I've said for years, you know, she asked me, she's like, when is the war going to end? And I said, I know exactly when it's going to end. I can tell you exactly when it's going to end. Posle nashi pobiedo. After our victory, that's when it ends. And until then, we're fighting for our existence. And, you know, as long as there's, you know, fighting with one hand tied behind your back, as long as there's, you know, secret deals and negotiations. I mean, I said it very clearly some months ago now, you know, until the Ukrainian railroads and the bridges across the Dnieper are blown up, you know, there's something wrong, you know, then we're not fighting this war. We're not going to win until that starts happening, which should have happened in the very first days of the war, back a year ago now. And it still hasn't. You know, and I read, you know, who is Oleg Sarev, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, he's a brilliant guy. He's one of the guys that I read every day. And you know, yeah, and he wrote the other day, you know, I mean, do you understand that Russia is still selling gas to Europe through Ukrainian pipelines, and they're paying the Ukrainians the transit fees?
Yes.
And you understand that Russia sells at least $770 million a month of products that go from Russia to Europe on Ukrainian railroads. And the money that the Ukrainians get, I mean, well, of course, the money that the Ukrainians get is all stolen, but those railroads, they bring back, you know, Leopard tanks and HIMARS missiles, you know, and, you know, what do you call it? Caesar cannons, you know, and stuff like that. I mean, which is killing Russian soldiers and Russian civilians. So, you know, and as I said for decades now about American politicians, and apparently it applies to all politicians, including here, is that what they say means nothing, and what they do says everything.
Everything. Very true, Russell. And if you think about, yes, we talked about before that billions of dollars are paid to Ukraine. So Zelensky, when he screams to European Union and the countries in Europe, don't take Putin's bloody money, refuse trade with Russia. In the meantime, he is quite silent. The fact that he's taken very well money from Russia all this time and all these years, including now that Ukraine and Turkey are the only two pipelines that are left after Nord Stream 2, which Russian gas can be supplied over to Europe. And so Ukraine now even getting more money. And this grain deal, I don't know, this China stepping in, really, you know, China owns or at least leases for 50 years plus minus, and Chinese corporations own a lot of land in Ukraine now, and they own some big plants. And I think Russia also, when Zelensky nationalized one of the Chinese investor-owned Ukrainian factories, then the next day Russia, you know, hit that factory, whatever they were producing, and there was military related, but they wouldn't touch that factory before Zelensky nationalized its assets and this entire factory and basically robbed the Chinese. So it looks like China has a lot of interest in Ukraine, including land, including factories, including investments. And there could be another thing why Russia is being so cautious or so, you know, what is it, reserved in how it does and what it does. So there are lots of players on this chessboard, that's for sure. And I've heard that Nikolaev now, they're pushing for Nikolaev, the port next to Odessa, to become a part of peace corridor and part of a grain deal. And that Kinburg sphere, and sort of release all these different ships that are sitting in the Nikolaev sea. It's actually like a river port, but they do have the access to the sea. And they have all these vessels and ships, I guess, that are stuck in there for the last year. So Zelensky, and then sounds like obviously Turkey, and now seems like China is in favor of this grain deal. They're going to expand the grain deal to now Nikolaev. So how is it going to help Russia to ever go towards Nikolaev if Nikolaev is going to be part of some kind of peace corridor? In other words, the longer this goes, the more countries' interests are trying to protect. The Russians' hands are tied. More people are dying. Where this is all going, people? I'm like, somebody's have to, like you said, make a decisive victory or something to where this has to end. Every day more people are dying. That's insanity. Right, Russell?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and DPR people.
And civilians,
and not just
people.
those. And I mean, and I understand that on the global geopolitical chessboard, the people, I mean, you know, Vladimir Putin's job is to protect Russia. That's his job. You know, and if he seriously believed that to let Ukraine kill everybody in Donetsk would actually protect Russia, he would do it. You know, and I hope he doesn't, and I hope he doesn't believe that either. But I mean, and you know what? That would be his job to do it, to protect 130 million Russians and the country of Russia against, you know, 1 million Donbass citizens or whatever. I mean, that's, you know, that's mathematics, you know, and that's the hard politics. But the thing is, it won't. You know, every concession that Putin makes to his enemies only emboldens them, only makes them more impudent. It only makes them escalate and provoke more and more. I mean, we're fighting against Nazis. The only thing they understand is force. They're like mad dogs. You can't, you know, sit down and, you know, with a dog with rabies, you can't give him some dog food and pet him and say, nice doggy, and he's going to be good. You know, There's only one. You have to put them out of their misery. You have to, as they said they were going to do, you have to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. And until it's done, they are an existential, deadly threat, not just to the Russians in Donbass, but to Russia itself, and the Russians in Rostov, and the Russians in Belgorod. You know, I mean, you know, the Russians in Moscow too. whether they understand it or not.
And the Russians across the world too, because they obviously now this ideology is spreading across, and it's brought by lots of refugees, where you see in Europe, they're harassing people who are Russian speakers, and in other places, yeah, the ideology that currently Zelensky regime supports is spreading around the world. Then what we're going to do here? Oh,
well, it's. Do you feel harassment yourself in the United States?
well, you mean by harassment by whom? But I have to tell you, there is people who write to me every day who trying to speak about Ukraine situation, and they get death threats. Oh yeah, absolutely. From what they call pro-Ukrainian activists.
Mm-hmm.
There is Americans are on the blacklist. Do you know Scott Ritter, some of the guys who speak on this subject, and he talks a lot about disarmament? There is Colonel McGregor. He used to serve on the Trump administration as the senior advisor. He is on the blacklist. Ukrainian disinformation agency funded by United States taxpayer dollars is actually targeting American citizens, calling them Russian propagandists like Rand Paul, like even Tulsi Gabbard, a former congresswoman, then Rand Paul is the sitting senator, Colonel Black, former Virginia state senator. These people on Ukrainian blacklist, hit list, called Russian propagandists, and we know that people on Ukrainian hit list have died. Like people like Daria Dugina has been murdered by the car bomb. Yeah, there is a lot of people in America now who are waking up to the idea that the Azov battalion being paraded in United States Congress, while United States Congress a few years ago declared that Azov battalion is associated with neo-Nazi ideology, but somehow now it's okay to bring them to United States Congress and give them honors. So this ideology is spreading. And yes, Scott Ritter said before, he said, I'm a military guy, he said. I'm not paranoid, he said, but I do walk outside and I check my car every morning, he says, because I am being targeted by Ukraine. And he says, I have a pro-Ukrainian Bandera type camp someplace in New York, just few miles from where he lives. And then they gather there for the children camps, and then they have the Bandera glorification ceremonies there. So yeah, this ideology, if left unchecked, it's going to spread, and Americans are going to find themselves in very precarious position, trying to explain themselves, because the ideology of neo-Nazism has nothing to do with what we stand as American citizens and our Constitution stands. So we cannot find middle ground. It has to be the one or the other. And I know that it has to be the other means us. We cannot allow neo-Nazis run around the streets, like you said, like rabid dogs, and harass us and threaten us and trying to humiliate us or trying to call us Russian propagandists. No, they are going to be the one fearful. They are going to be the ones who will have to rewire their brain to fit in our American lifestyle, where we consider all people equal and all people are worthy of life, and not based on, oh, do you speak Ukrainian? Oh, then you are worthy. Oh, you speak Russian? Oh, no, you have to be exterminated. We do not allow this in America. I will not allow it, Russell.
I'm glad to hear that. You are a great example of what America could and should be, and maybe once was, but generally isn't so much anymore. But I mean, as someone who immigrated to America yourself, I mean, you're obviously a patriotic American. You are the ideal, like, success story, and also patriotic. You know, I mean, you inspire people with your example, and I admire you very much. And I'm always glad to talk to you. And I think that if more people were like you, that were as well informed, that took important issues seriously and understood the consequences of ignoring things like, neo-Nazism and stuff like that, because it's, the Second World War started because people weren't paying attention. And the Third World War can start the same way if people don't do what needs to be done, and and I'm sorry to see, and I hope that there is hope for America, because, so many people there are just so self-centered and brainwashed and lost and just stupid, uneducated, not only uneducated, but the true definition of stupid for me is when you're so stupid, you don't know how stupid you are, but you think you're smart. It's like, some kid that, makes a paper airplane and then thinks he can go tell, an airline pilot how to do his job, and there's so many people like that in the United States that it makes me hope for a miracle that the few people that are left, the 2 or 3%, that are, qualified to be called Americans or even human beings, who have a functioning brain and who have actually a spine that will actually go out and do, what's right and what needs to be done. I think that's 2 or 3% in the United States anymore, but still, that's like 10 million people. And so to those 10 million people, I say, let's get busy, do what needs to be done, take a lesson from the people of Donbass who stood up against, when we understood that we had a Nazi government, we stood up against them, and we've protected ourselves, and we've defied Nazism. And so we set an example for the world. And I hope that the good people in America can save the country of America. I love America. It's the government of America I hate. They are my enemy. They are the lapdogs of the oligarchs. But the good people of America, I love and always will love. And I am defending them here, fighting against what the United States government is doing in Ukraine. I'm a communist. I am fighting for a better world for everybody. Everybody, the whole world.
Russell, you're a communist. That's a news revelation to me. Look at you. Now Americans gonna say, oh no, Elena is talking to communists. No,
Whoops.
people.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
but what
no.
communism just means? It means equality. It means a fair shake for everybody.
Russell, give us your song. I don't discriminate, okay? If anybody discriminates, I don't. I personally do not agree with the particulars of a certain, concepts, including, communism, because I lived under communism. I live now in United States. I appreciate the market economy and ability to earn a living that, the government doesn't put a ceiling over your head. But I have news for you, Russell. I don't think you're a communist anymore, because we're now in the United States living in communism, because we have no incentive to make money anymore, because they've taken all of it, just like they did way back when during Soviet Union. We didn't have any free speech. We didn't have any in Soviet Union. We had to go a certain line, party line. You have to agree with your government. We have the same now. So I don't know, Russell, you may want to revise some of your views, because we're here now in the United States living in what you would think that kind of like the Soviet time, while they're telling us here that the Soviet time was so terrible. I'm thinking, guys, I have news for you. You outdid the Soviet times. You know what I mean? The Soviet times, yeah, people didn't have a freedom of speech, or people didn't do this, people didn't do that. but people also were not going around with gains and breaking the windows as those BLM guys did, and nobody's stopping them and setting things on fire in the middle of the street.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a new reality in the United States. And while we are being told that we're a market economy, I see it starting to remind the Soviet Union probably in the 90s, when
Mhm.
there became lawlessness, gangs, oligarchs, all these other shady elements of the society was getting the piece of the pie, while the hardworking people were getting the raw end of the stick.
Yeah,
You know?
I understand. And you know what? Let me just give you a very quick definition of my idea of communism.
Go ahead.
Okay, and it's very simple. It's like this. In a civilized society, the citizens of that society should not have to worry about whether they're going to have a place to live, whether they're going to have enough food to eat, to feed their children. They should not worry about going broke because they get sick. They should not have to go hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt just to get an education. And the way there should be a minimum level below which people in a civilized society should not live. I mean, when you see like in Cleveland or Philadelphia or Los Angeles or San Francisco, all these people living in tents on a sidewalk in the middle of a city, that's not a civilized country that has that kind of stuff. There should be, at least, a sustainable, livable level of life for every citizen, even if they're slackers, even if they're drunkards, even if they're completely stupid. They shouldn't. That doesn't mean that they should starve or something. So a minimum level of the quality of life that can be, that can be paid for all citizens. And then there's a big wide ladder between, you can live at the minimum level, you can do a little bit of work, you can do more work, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be a genius, but there also has to be a maximum level. There has to be, you can pay for the minimum level for all people by putting a maximum level on the 1%. And my personal opinion is that every billionaire on this planet is a thief. No one can work hard enough. No one can be smart enough to earn $1,000 million. And you understand that most of these billionaires now, they don't just have $1 billion. They have 50 billion or 100 billion. And so at that point, it's not money anymore. It's political power that you can buy judges and senators and governors, and corporations. I mean, it becomes a scam. It becomes, and the people that are billionaires, they think that a regular guy that makes $50,000 or $100,000 a year, they say, well, this guy's like an insect. I mean, I can spend that much on lunch and not even think about it. So there has to be, with a wide range between the minimum and the maximum, but there has to be a level below which people don't live, and there has to be a level above which people don't live. And then besides that, socialized medicine, free education, guaranteed housing, and everybody can get along fine then, because you won't have gangs because nobody has to steal, because they don't have to go out because they lost their job. They don't have to go out and pull a knife on some old lady to get money, to feed their kids or something, So, I believe in sharing. I believe in helping each other. And I understand that there was a lot of problems with the Soviet Union and the ideas of communism as it's been implemented. But I think that we can do it better. And I certainly think that what we're seeing right now in the world is the final death throes of the ultimate capitalism, imperialism, and that the people that think they own the world want to exterminate most of us to make more room for them and enslave the rest of us that they don't kill. And I'm against that. Nazism is fascism. And it's basically a philosophy of masters and slaves. And I don't want to be anybody's master. And I will, fight to the death anyone that wants to try and make me their slave. And I have no respect for anybody that's willing to be a slave. And that's basically my definition of communism. It's different from what was done in the Soviet Union.
I don't know, where do I begin? I was going to ask you to sing a song, Russell, but I think we got into such a heavy subject. I don't even know I am prepared to discuss, because I can understand where you're coming from. Obviously, you've seen life a little bit more than I did, to your credit. But I have seen life actually during Soviet Union, and I think that you may have a bit of a little idealistic view of what it actually was like. Because yes, on the surface, you have people sort of are taken care of, and and this and that and the other thing. But on the other hand, there is still elites. There is still those masters, and there is still those slaves. Because if you look at Brezhnev and his daughter, right? She was like a queen of, what is it, underground diamond trade, when nobody could buy a diamond in the store. Brezhnev's daughter, or whatever, wife, the whole family, they were dealing diamonds on the side, while other people went to jail for buying one or selling one. So I put it this way, I think that the point that civilized society should not have people living on the streets like we do in America, that's a valid point. Whether communism has to do it, or it has to be simple America following our Constitution, where it actually takes care of its own people and that our American people's dignity, versus sending billions to Ukraine and countries across the board so our corrupt politicians could launder this money together with their corrupt politicians. That's a little different story. And to me, that particularly doesn't have that much to do with the ideology of it. To me, it has something to do with the dignity of basic American dignity. If you believe that all men are made equal, if you believe that our rights come from God and not from government, then it means that we should care that somebody on the street, American, is dying there while everybody's driving by and nobody, pays a heed. And instead, we're sending money to Ukraine when our own people cannot afford medical care and our own people cannot afford education. Yeah, something is wrong with this, system is broken. But I wouldn't go full-fledged and say that the communism is an answer, because I lived under communism and I have seen the reality basically of any system. If you have corrupt people on top, then no matter what they tell you from the pulpit, how wonderful things are, there is still the ones who have and the ones who have not.
I agree with that completely. But it's funny, my wife is sitting here listening to me, and when you said that you had lived under communism, she said, "Yeah, me too." And I can tell you that.
I can tell that when I have water, food, medicine, free education, I don't care that Brezhnev has diamonds.
Well, and she says, when I have food and water and a house and heat and medical care and free education, she doesn't care if Brezhnev has diamonds.
I see. That's a good point. Well, let's finish on this nice, happy note, because we'll save our ideological debates till the next time. But I'm glad, Russell, you came clean here. Should we call this day as official coming out for Russell?
Well, I've actually been, I was actually in the Sud Vremeni combat unit when I came here, which, you know, if you know about Sergei Kurganyan, Essence of Time, Sud Vremeni. It's a communist unit, movement in Russia. It's very, very big there. And they say their idea is to make the Soviet Union 2.0, to learn from the mistakes of the Soviet Union. I mean, one of the main things that they say is that the communists should have never been against Russian Orthodox Church, that it's not a contradiction, and that they should have worked together with them the whole time instead of being like, you know, whatever, competitors or enemies or whatever like that. And so, I mean, you know, well, let me put it like this. I went to Cuba back in 1995. And I had a conversation with a Cuban army captain. And before I went to Cuba, I mean, I'd read a lot about communism and stuff, Ho Chi Minh, Che Guevara, like that, Mao Zedong, Lenin. And, but in the United States, I mean, to say I'm a communist, it's like saying I'm a child molester or something, you know. It's like the worst thing you can possibly say, you know. And so I just called myself a socialist, you know, because it's like it's like the nice name for communism or something. And I went to Cuba, and I'm having this conversation with this Cuban army officer, and I said, I'm a socialist. And she said, well, I'm a communist. And I said, well, what's the difference? And she said, a communist is someone that's willing to fight for socialism. And that's what I basically believe. I mean, I think people should share and take care of each other. Okay. And I can tell you a lot of people here.
I'm a bloody capitalist then. My coming out, I'm a bloody capitalist because I believe in people have a right to earn. A sky is the limit. Government should not limit my ability to earn as much as I am willing to work hard. And I know this was impossible under communism, under socialism in Soviet Union. But my biggest beef is with them is they are the ones who broke the Soviet Union and sold out millions of people because they're the ones who got bribed by the West. So in the end,
capitalism.
The communists in the end sold out their own people. So why?
I understand that. I understand that. And there's a lot of people here that do understand that.
And the essence of time says about.
And the essence of time, Sud Vremeni, they talk about that a lot. But, you know, I mean, as far as capitalism, you know, unbridled capitalism.
Exactly.
You know,
I was just going to say
the limit. In the end, there's only one guy with everything, and everybody else has nothing.
Everything has to be in balance because unbridled capitalism is, again, people laying on the streets while everybody's driving by and they're dying and nobody cares. You have to have a balance in the society where you do invite the private enterprise, but the private enterprise would want to have incentives that they could give charity, that they would like to invest back in the society. But right now, what happens in America, the private enterprise is stripped bare. And we have no say so how our tax money is spent because they're using it on Ukraine. Me, as a person, as a taxpayer, as a responsible capitalist, as a bridled capitalist, I would like to see this money being spent on my people here in America. But my communist Biden takes my money and claims he's a capitalist and sends it to his communist buddy Zelensky to spend it and go in it right in their pocket for their diamond trades. We're scary. Exactly. You see what I mean?
That's true. That's true. And I mean, and corruption is, you know, is the enemy of any system of government or society, you know, and it has to be dealt with harshly, you know. But at the same time, I mean, what we see now, I mean, you are I mean, you don't own a big corporation. You're not a billionaire, are you?
No, but that's why I said you can't hate me just yet, but I can't say that I'm poor either because I
Well,
work hard
I mean,
and I'm
I
glad that I'm
understand that, but I mean,
you.
but the thing is, if you were a billionaire, you wouldn't
I
have to
know.
worry about paying taxes because you'd hire 50 lawyers that would find out how not, or else you'd go buy off a couple of senators and tell them to give you the loophole in the law, you know? I mean, so you're still a working person. You're still an independent entrepreneur, and that's, you know, that's not just respectable, that's admirable. And, you know, and that's a good thing. But I mean, at the same
But then,
time, you're what you're facing against now, and really, you're not facing communism, you're facing fascism, because Benito Mussolini, he defined fascisms. Maybe you've heard this saying before. He said, fascism is the merger between state and corporate power.
yes, you're right. We are experiencing fascism because all of our big tech and our big corporation basically have our politicians as their puppet dogs. And
That's
they're
right.
not working in our best interest, in the best interest of American people. They're working in best interest of their donors. And look, when Victoria Nuland goes to Ukraine, who sponsors the meeting? Chevron Oil. Oh la
Of
la.
course. Of course.
Yeah, right. So yeah, we know who in whose pockets they are, and it's definitely not American people. Well, Russell, when they had the 40 billion, the first bill to Ukraine, I mentioned it to you before. Last May, I believe, I was so shocked. I remembered the date. I think it was 19th of May or something like that. American Congress declined, stopped, banned the bill of $48 billion that would help American businesses, the gyms, the restaurants, the ones who suffered from COVID closures. They tabled that bill, blocked it, 48 billion to American small businesses in Senate, blocked. Same day, they all voted in favor of the bill, 40 billion to Ukraine. Who are these people working for? Not for us, not for Americans. So,
No.
yeah, definitely big problem here in America. But hey, give us your song. Forget all this ideology stuff. As a bridled capitalist to a unbridled communist. Give us a song. Give us some inspiration. Tell us, Russell, what the song is about.
This is a song that I wrote when I was a soldier on the front lines about my new home, Donbass, Novorossiya. I came up with the idea for the words. I had some of my friends help me translate it into Russian, and it's a very popular song here. It's played on the radio. It's been played on the radio in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. I went to Grozny a few years ago, and I went through a checkpoint downtown, a police checkpoint, and the cop looked at me. He goes, "You're from Donbass?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he said, "I've heard your song." So this
Wow.
song's it's been around. Sweet Home, Novorossiya. Я купаюсь в реках Калмиус, восхожу над берегом, подна земля трудакторов, сон свет смотрим новый дом, добрый дом, Новороссия. Donetsk, Lugansk, уже. Макиевка изновата. Ну да, от Харьков до Одесса, это Новороссия. Донецк – это классный город. Это мой новый дом. Брат меня крутой мужчины.
Oh, I'm a cool man.
И все есть красивые женщины.
And beautiful women.
Добрый дом, Новороссия. Донецк, Луганск, Славянск, Горловка, Сар-Могила, от Харьков до Одесса, это Новороссия. Я работал там на аэропорт, на Близна и монастырь. Меня заложила уши. Сколько братьев посекли. Брат, меня уши не слушаешь. Бог встретил наш герой. Моя кровь течет на эта земля, но фашист уже лежит. Это наша земля, Новороссия. Донецк, Луганск, Иловайск, Дебальцево, Бахмут, от Харьков до Одесса, это Новороссия. Ты пришел в Новороссию, для друга есть зеленый чай. Но ты пришел к нам с войной, превратиться в берегной. Это наша земля, Новороссия. Донецк, Луганск тоже. Макиевка, Изновата. От Харьков до Одесса. Это Новороссия.
Oh, wow. Wow. Go, Russell. Go, Russell. I love it. So basically, the song said that we have green tea for our friends here in New Russia, which is the Donetsk, Lugansk area. And those who, but you, friend, talking to imaginary Ukrainian fighter, did not come to us with peace. You came to fight us. So you may be mixed a little bit with dirt if you do that, right? That's kind of like the
It's like
line.
Alexander Nevsky said, you know, if you come with the sword in your hands, by the sword you will die.
Yeah. On this positive note, we're going to thank Russell for being with us. I don't know if anybody is going to be able to watch our 2-hour interview that went by. Just
You
as,
you should cut it in half.
Yeah, I should try doing that. Russell, my favorite, excellent. Today we talked about just everything China and Ukraine and Russia, and had some ideological discussion. One thing we do agree that our politicians are corrupt, and unfortunately no matter what your regime is, it sounds like time for some type of regime change, because they don't really care about us. We should sing that song, right? They don't really care about us. Yeah,
That's
so
facts.
until we, all the people of all the countries, start to understand that our governments are lying to us, basically using us to perpetuate these wars, which basically just enrich themselves and their cronies and their bodies and their donors, and kill more people across the world, I think we're going to be remaining in the dark. So we're doing this, an interview with Russell, one of the many, where we're trying to bring some light, right, Russell?
Yes, and that's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I mean, the ideological differences don't really mean anything. I know that you're a very good person. I know you have a kind heart. I know that you're wise, and it's people like you and me together that are working to make a better world for everybody.
Here's the thing, Russell. We are not an enemy of each other. It's a corrupt governments who like to keep us thinking that we are all divided so we could keep fighting each other. So this way they're in the safe zone, right?
That's right. That's right.
Because as soon as they can keep us all divided on, should we have this gender or this gender? Should we have this political confession or this party or the other party? As soon as we fight against each other, we're never going to face the real enemy, who is the corrupt politicians who are trying to or are enslaving us no matter where we live in the world.
That's
so
right.
at least if we can agree on that, I think that's all good. Yeah.
I agree too.
Thank you, Russell. Have a great day and be safe. And thank you,
Okay.
everybody who was patient to listen. Thank you.